Welcome to Handmade Happenings. I'm Marissa. Today I'm showing you how to sew princess seams. Now I recently did a video on how to sew darts, and princess seams have the same function, which is adding shape to a garment. In fact, I once saw them described as a dart that's hidden in a seam. So this is what a princess seam pattern looks like. You'll typically have a center piece and then a side piece. So this is the front, so this is center front, side front. And you can see here, this is the seam. And it's basically what's tricky about these is you are sewing on a curve. And depending on where that seam goes up will depend on if you have much or any curve really on the other piece. So you're trying to get a straight or semi-straight piece to sew onto a curve. You'll notice these marks here on either of the pattern pieces. These are placement markings, and they're to help me line the pieces up when I'm sewing them together. So you just need to remember to mark these somehow when you're cutting out your pieces. So I'm going to demonstrate this with much smaller pieces, and I'm just going to cut it out like I would in any other pattern. The center is cut on the fold with this. You'll have to check your pattern to see how yours is done. I find on the fold is the most common because it saves paper. Once your pieces are cut out, you do need to mark these spots. I just do it with a notch, so I just clip it right in. As long as it's smaller than the seam allowance, it's not a problem. Now the next step is to go ahead and stay stitch these curved edges on the center piece. So if you don't know, stay stitching is just a line of stitches along that seam, usually done a little smaller than your seam allowance. It's supposed to help with things like this stretching out, like it keeps it from stretching out too far. Now I will note that this is best practice, but I have not been in the habit of doing it. So if you've seen any of my videos where I've done princess seams and noticed that I did not do that, that is why. I have noticed while working on this video that it really does make a difference and makes things a little easier further down the road. But it is a good habit to do, and one that I hope to start doing more often. Once the stay stitching is done, I can go ahead and pin the center piece to the side piece. It's always easier, in my opinion, to have the center piece up on top when you're sewing and pinning because it's easier to see what you're doing. So I'm going to start by lining up these two notches. Pin there. And then line up the top two notches. And pin there. And you can see this kind of does not work. So what you need to do is come in with scissors and clip notches in between those two spots. And these need to be just under the size of your seam allowance. And this is where I find the stay stitching to be really helpful because that gives me a guide so that I'm not having to guess how deep I can go. And as you do that, it should release the tension so that the pieces can spread out and your raw edges can line up. If they don't, then you can just clip a couple more notches a little closer together, and you might be able to clip a little deeper. In this case, what I'm going to do is deepen the notches that marked my placement. And once I've got everything adjusted, I just pin it in place. And now I'm just going to sew along the seam, this time using the proper seam allowance. So after it's sewn, it should look something like this. Now I did get a slight pucker here. I think I probably forgot to pull a pin out or didn't pull it out in time before it's sewn over that. That's actually kind of unusual. Normally if I get puckering, it's along this seam allowance here or this piece here. But otherwise it looks pretty good, and I'm just going to go ahead and do this other side. And actually I'm going to clip my curves before I pin it on, because it's just easier sometimes to see it that way. And there is the other side sewn. It kind of keeps looking like there's a pucker there, but it's just a wrinkle. After the seams are sewn, you do want to press them. You can either press them open or towards the side seam. I usually press them towards the side because a lot of times I finish my seams with a serger, so obviously those two seams are together, so it's not as easy to, well, it's impossible to open them and press them open. And much like the darts, if you have trouble sewing around the bust area, you can use a pressing ham to help keep everything flat as you're pressing. And that's how I sew princess seams. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'll do my best to answer them. And I hope you will join me next week for another handmade happening.